Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome back to another video of me looking back on Final Fantasy XIV's past. To celebrate the 10th anniversary, I've been going through all the old patches and jobs and all that fun stuff, and we're getting into Heavensward at this point. We did cover 3.0 in the previous video, and we ended on kind of a sour note, talking about how 3.05 and 3.01 didn't really leave a whole lot for people to do if you weren't in a hardcore raiding, and Gordius was kind of a disaster for hardcore raiders, and severely neutered the interest in the game at the time. Well, now we're going to be diving into patch 3.1, a chance for Final Fantasy XIV at the time to redeem itself. And did it? Not really, no. So why not? Why wasn't Final Fantasy XIV in the hottest of places? Well, they just continued to try things that didn't really work out. They didn't draw in casual players and keep them playing, and they didn't draw in hardcore players and keep them playing. You know, we often talk about how, oh, you know, there's not enough of this type of content, enough of that type of content, but there's usually enough for like some group in any given patch. That wasn't the case in 3.05 and 3.1 and 3.15, where it was a dark time. So let's talk a little bit about why. So first up, some of the features and some of the things that are just kind of standard in patches. You know, we had the new MSQ. There was the continuing drama with Ishgard, the continuation of the Dragonsong War saga. But however, something very, very important came out of patch 3.1's MSQ, and that was the introduction of the Warriors of Darkness. Yep, we got to meet Ardbert and crew here, and we had no idea what it would mean for the future. I'm not going to talk about it too much because obviously we'll have plenty of time to go over those details in future retrospective videos, but it's crazy to think that it was this patch that started that whole saga that would bring us through so many of Final Fantasy XIV's most iconic moments. We, of course, had new dungeons. I believe we only had 2 in this one, at least. If there was another one in the patch notes, I missed it. We had St. Mosion's Arboretum, a pretty cool dungeon, definitely a decent addition for 3.1, and something that Yoshi P said they had to tune back a lot going into the actual patch release, because originally when they were testing it on their end and the original boss mechanics and scaling were all done, he said it was something more like a savage dungeon. And I believe that it is that exact comment that has carried through all these years and given us that constant, like, oh, they could just do something like Mythic Plus, or when are we going to get extreme dungeons or savage dungeons, because they teased that St. Mosion's Arboretum had this like ultra difficult scaling when they initially made it. I still want to see that version of the Arboretum, and I think a lot of people would like to see almost the pre-tested versions of these dungeons, at the very least in a panel, if not to outright play. The other dungeon was the hard mode of Pharaoh Sirius. Now, Pharaoh Sirius, as we went over in the 2.1 retrospective video, was one of the most difficult dungeons on release that the game has ever seen. It constantly wiped people on the first and the second boss, and the third boss, while not really as it's something that's iconic to the series, but wasn't really as harped on for its difficulty, definitely still brought the pain, and I saw a few Duty Finder groups definitely share their struggles with that one. This was the hard mode. Of course, it being just level cap content means that at this point, with the way they were developing things, it wasn't really that bad. In fact, one of the enemies in there is incredibly. Actually, no, that was in the original Pharaoh series. This one was pretty standard all the way through. It actually still had some pretty tricky stuff. But honestly, I was just glad to get the music back, because Pharaoh series, the original one, really didn't let me enjoy the looping music, whereas this one went out of its way to make sure I could. Then we got the new 24-man raid, the Void Arc. Now, I mentioned this in the previous video as well. This was one of the coolest introductions to a 24-man series and a completely original story to Final Fantasy XIV. Something that we very seldom get with the 24-mans. Like, yes, the way the Crystal Tower is done is definitely unique to 14, but it's still based on Final Fantasy III. And yes, we would get the Nier raids, we would get the Evil East raids. They're all based on something. Whereas this was built completely within Final Fantasy XIV's lore, and for some reason, for some people, you know, they either liked it more for that reason or disliked it more because there was less nostalgia behind it, except for the main villain, who Final Fantasy VIII fans were definitely a little nostalgic for. But in the Void Arc itself, excluding the other 2, which we'll talk about in the other retrospectives, it was just, the way it was hyped up was so unique. Finding that random ship out in the Sea of Clouds or the Churning Mists and just wondering what it was for months on end, the community thinking maybe it was the Lunar Whale or something like that. This was the culmination confirmation of all those speculations and rumors and all that, and it was just a really cool introduction. As a raid itself, though, it is, to this day, regarded to one of the easiest 24-mans that have ever released. I think Euphrosyne and Aglaya might give it a run for its money nowadays, but it was so easy that the dev team actively apologized for releasing too easy of a 24-man raid. Yeah, considering it's not hard content to begin with, that was kind of surprising. And it's going to be funny when we talk about 3.3 and the hard turn on that was taken after Void Ark released. But a solid 24-man and a solid introduction to a brand new story with some very notable characters from across the Final Fantasy franchise. We also had tribal dailies. They were still called Beast Tribe quests back then. The Vanu, a pretty cool one in the Sea of Clouds, and of course getting the dance that you get from that. I can't even do it correctly because I haven't done the original one in so long, because there's an evolved one we'll talk about later on. But at this point, at the very least, it was only one new Beast Tribe quest. Doing 2 per patch during some of the Realm Reborn stuff was kind of exhausting, so we were kind of glad they only released 1. Not to mention that the Vanu, it took a while. Sea of Clouds is a big place, and you have to do a lot of flying around to get these done, but at the end of the day, you know, Beast Tribe quests are Beast Tribe quests. You know, you spend 15-20 minutes a day doing them, you get a little bit of story every few days, and then you pick up the rewards, a dance, some glam, you know, whatever it is they're going to offer, and you move on. The Vanu dance, though, definitely up there in terms of rewards. And I hate to say it, but that's where the kind of neutral to good kind of stuff, it tapers out a little bit. There's other things in here, and we'll get to it, but the rest of 3.1, whether it be talking about 3.1 or 3.15, kind of a disaster, because Final Fantasy XIV was still trying to recover from 3.0 and 3.05's kind of lack of casual content. But not only that, the way the raid scene was destroyed by Gordius Savage meant that they needed something for players to kind of feel reinvigorated to get back in. And you know what? A new Extreme trial just might be the thing for that. So we got our Minstrel's Ballad, Thordan's Reign, or simply Thordan Extreme. At the time, it was regarded to as one of the most difficult extremes. It had a lot of mechanics that if you didn't do coil or you weren't already a hardcore raider, they would have seemed entirely new, or at least something you only saw partially in the normal mode and then had to be greatly expanded upon in the extreme. It was scaled up to be pretty difficult for the gear that was at the time. The amount of damage the boss did was very, very high, and the recoverability was difficult, especially during select mechanics. It was so difficult, in fact, that a lot of people struggled to clear it, which wasn't helping the raid scene that was still struggling with Gordius. Not to mention the fact that A3S, the fight that was walling most people, this was essentially supposed to be your way of getting some more gear. You know, if you beat Thordan Extreme, you got this item level 205 weapon, which was, you know, only 5 item levels under the maximum item level you could obtain. So with these new weapons, the DPS checks in A3 would be less severe, and people would get more clears. That was the theory, at least, and the dev team seemed to express a similar interest. Instead, they just struggled to beat Thordan Extreme, and now people who like to do extreme level content felt like they couldn't do this, so now they were walled out of something new. And the people who had already beaten Gordius didn't care about Thordan all that much, and the people who hadn't, it didn't help them that much. So it just perpetuated the same problem that they already had, and that problem doesn't even stop with Thordan. We're not even done talking about the other things Gordius messed with. However, we're going to move aside, and we're going to instead go to some other content that didn't go over very well. First of all, the Diadem. Oh boy, now you all know the Diadem, or you may know the Diadem from Shadowbringers, where it was used as part of the rebuilding of Ishgard. You could go in and gather, and you could take those things and craft, and you could, you know, put in the points, and there was like seasonal rankings, and the top-rated people got these specific titles, and there was a statue of whoever the biggest contributing class was. There's all sorts of cool involvement stuff. Ishgard got all these like Fate-style stuff. You know, it was a whole huge thing, and eventually we even got an Ishgard housing area. That is not how the Diadem began. The Diadem began in patch 3.1 as a mixed crafting, gathering, and combat zone. So you could either queue in from Ishgard's airship dock with up to 8 people, or your free company could build an airship and depart as a party of 24. However, the weird thing is if you queued in as a group of 24, it just split the alliance when you got in. So it was like you weren't even playing together in the first place, but you queued in together, which was really strange. What's cute in it was the same large open zone. The design has largely remained the same. The layout, too, has largely remained the same. And then once you go in, they'll give you a few objectives. When you complete the objectives, you'll be able to fly. You'll have to find some ether currents. Literally every time you enter, you have to relearn how to fly. And then it'll be like, kill some of this mob or craft some of this or gather some of that or catch some fish or whatever. And that would give you tomes, plus I think some like pirate spoils, which you could go exchange for some stuff that nobody really cared about. And then after you had done the objectives, you just went around and killed monsters, spawned notorious monsters, and, just killed them. It was almost kind of like Bozja or Eureka in that sense, and was really the base grounds for what Eureka and Bozja would eventually become. This was like the beta test for those things. And the only other real thing you got from it, other than the tomes and the spoils, to maybe grab a few things, like, I don't know, maybe I don't know, because they've gotten rid of it. I can't even like go in game and look. And I actually looked at my own channel. I didn't even have a video on 3.1's Diadem. That's how disappointed I was. I didn't even make like a My Thoughts video, or if I did, I deleted it. It's not showing up in my search, so I don't know what happened. Whatever that means. The only other thing was like pink gear with random stats on it. And most of the time, the stats were garbage. So pretty much after 2 or 3 days, nobody cared anymore. And the content was dead. And that's really all there is to it. That's the end of 3.1 Diadem. And it has a legacy still to follow, because there's actually a 3.5 Diadem. And then there's the Shadowbringers Diadem. In fact, was there another one in between there? I don't think so. They made some changes to Diadem like here or there in between, but yeah, Diadem was a troubled place. So this was done in 2 or 3 days. Nobody cared. Casual players didn't care. Hardcore players didn't care. It was lame. No one wanted to do it. And as if that wasn't enough, then you have Lords of Verminion. This is an activity that is still in the Gold Saucer today, and it is basically an RTS where you take your minions, and each different minion has their own stats, their own skills, and you try to destroy the enemy crystals before they destroy yours. Some units are better at destroying units, some are better at destroying crystals, some are faster, some hit harder, they all have different skills. And then there's even a PvE mode where you can challenge PvE challenges to see if you can better them, and there are actually some decent rewards from that. Lords of Verminion today, it seems like a nice little fun thing to do once a week for your challenge log, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, to get some MGP. Most people just zerg down the mission against the Gubu. I think that's like the 4th or 5th mission. And there's even tournaments that people usually, at the bare minimum, participate in, just a few matches, just to qualify for a little bit more bonus MGP. No one really thinks about it much, but this was a major piece of content that was released and was absolutely despised. In fact, it started as an April Fool's joke. The year before, they were like, ha ha ha, Lords of Vermilion. That was a thing. That was a thing that was running in Japan. So like, oh, we're going to do Lords of Verminion. Ha ha ha, April Fools. And then they did it for real. And nobody liked it. It was just people who were playing Final Fantasy XIV were trying to play an RTS. And if they weren't trying to play this sort of half RTS that they had created that was clearly not fully fleshed out, but was also too complicated at the same time. So you have Thordan. Okay, let's do this. You have Void Ark, which you get 1 piece of loot from a week. That's probably all you do it. Thordan, which a lot of people couldn't do, and the people who could do it didn't really want to do it. You had tribal quests to do daily until you finish the story. You had Diadem, which was pretty much abandoned within 2 or 3 days. You have Lords of Verminion, which nobody cared about. You see the problem with 3.1 after 3.05? Does this retrospect really put it into perspective for you? Because I'm not even done with the things to talk about here. That's the crazy thing. So now, before I talk about some of the smaller things of 3.0 or 3.1, which there are actually some very important things that were changed, some of which I probably even missed, let's skip ahead to 3.15. 3.15 was the introduction to the Scholasticate side quest. This was a follow-up to an NPC that we met in Hildebrand in A Realm Reborn. And while it is very much something for kind of like the lore heads, it's really regarded to as this really solid side quest in Ishgard, and something I would highly recommend as well. It will do a deep dive into some of the deeper Ishgard lore at the time and give you a much better perspective on that location as a whole. So if you're big into learning the lore of the game, you pretty much can't skip that. If you didn't know it was there, I recommend going back. So big solid W. The problem was the other thing they did in 3.15, the Anima weapon. Now, back in A Realm Reborn, we had the relics on release, and in 2.2, we got the Zodiac weapon series. That was the series where we grinded out books and tomes and light and all that stuff, try to build up a weapon that by the end of the expansion would be best in slot. Now, the Anima weapon was a sequel quest to that. Now, I say sequel even though they were two completely separate things, because you could actually take a finished Zodiac weapon and skip the first step of the Anima weapon. And the first step of the Anima weapon was the same as the first step of the Zodiac weapon. Go do fates in every zone and collect these stones. Go collect Atmas, bring them back, and you'll be good. And I think you needed 3 from each zone, if memory serves. I think you needed 18 Atmas at the end of it all. And then the follow-up quest was to bring back like 20 of 4 different unidentified items, and you could do these by like spamming Alexander Normal or spending tomes or doing leave quests. And also, actually, the leave quest one would be a follow-up step, but besides the point, it was more essentially tedious tasks. However, they were more tedious this time than they were with the Zodiac weapon. And this problem is cited to be because of Gordius. The dev team wanted to make this a grind that would get you a weapon equal to Gordius Savage power weapons, which means they wanted to consider how difficult it was to get a weapon from the manipulator at the end of Gordius Savage. So they cranked up the amount of grinding that needed to be done to match that purported effort. So what we ended up with was one of the least liked steps of any relic quest that we've ever had. I myself think I did 600 plus, what was that? Yeah, I think 600 plus Alexander Normals? That sounds right to me. Something in that vicinity. I hate saying it out loud, but yeah, it was like 200 of 1 and 200 of 2 and like 200 of 3 and like 30 or 60 something of 4. I don't know, because like you had to factor in the tomes you got plus the precision items that you got. Is just a weird thing. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. And they had to actively apologize for pretty much everything I just mentioned. For Lords of Verminion, for Diadem, for the Anima weapon, for Gordius. They basically apologized for 2 whole patches. Like, yeah, the story that was unraveling was great, but story only gets you so far. Not to mention, because of the expansion launch, I'm pretty sure we waited 5 months for this patch. So it was like way longer. It was like a whole extra 4 weeks or something for the patch. And that was the reception. It wasn't a good time. It really, really wasn't. And, you know, it's not like they didn't try to do anything or they didn't do anything successful in that time. They did do some job changes, fixed up some stuff with Paladin, which didn't really make it more popular. Ninja got its TP cost / Bard got that faster responding, straighter shot proxy. You know, instead of it being after the animation, it's like as soon as you fire the shot off. TP cost reductions and Astro, weird one. Royal Road saving between areas. Okay, so you could pull a Royal Road before going into a dungeon and still have it. Whoop-de-doo. There are other things too. Estate sharing, being able to make someone a tenant of your home was possible in 3.1. Gold Saucer challenge logs, which we mentioned Lords of Verminion, you know, they're still popular for that. That was introduced in 3.1, alongside the logging and mining minigames, 2 of the more popular ones for actually grinding out MGP or even just doing the minigame challenge logs. Flying mounts. So Heavensward introduced flying mounts, but only a few mounts could fly. And starting from 3.1 onward, they started trying to make every single mount fly until nowadays, yes, every single mount in the game can fly now. That wasn't the case back then. So they just like would gradually cycle in ones that could fly. And so that was, you know, it was the start of that being introduced. Seeing in-progress timers for duties if you join in progress. Default race gear being brought up to item level 5, which may not seem like much, but for those who don't remember, when you start the game, one of the first quests that you take asks you to get item level 5 armor for pretty much everything, including your headpiece. So your body, hands, boots, and feet, which are all stuff you'll get from your racial passives, weren't good enough. You had to go to a nearby vendor and buy a full set of level 5 armor, go and do side quests and stuff, and come back with it. This made it so you just needed the helmet, I believe, if I'm not misremembering. And so that was a huge alleviance for new players who are often confused and distraught by this little tiny side quest. The idle cam and G-pose were added in 3.1. I mean, those are 2 massive, massive features for people even to this day. So we cannot discredit that. And on top of that, even simple things like the flying mount roulette, there's so many little like housing quality of life stuff and like boosting the amount of tomes that Hunts gave. There's all sorts of little things, because I think no matter what, Final Fantasy XIV always has good quality of life in its patches. Always has something that people want. Always something that goes, yes, finally. But like all the actual content, no. That did not go over well. So dark times for Final Fantasy XIV. And you know what? It kind of gets better soon, but it still takes a little bit of effort. But that is a story for another video. Anyway, that is going to be a wrap for my retrospective look at patch 3.1. If you were around, post your memories in the comment section. If you weren't, be glad. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see all of you in the next one. And until then, take care.